Guys, thanks for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk. Returning listener, it's great to have you back. New to the channel, really glad you joined us. Hope you like what you hear. Our guest tonight, awesome guy named David Schnurman. He went to law school, but does not practice law. He's got, so he's done several things. He's got a company that does continuing education. It's called Lawyer's Edge. He does a podcast around that. He's written a book called 11 Suitcases. He's actually written two books. We're going to talk about both of those. But his book he just published, which has already come out and has already hit the bestseller list, is called 11 Suitcases. It's about he and his wife moving to Barcelona with their young children for 2 years and kind of how that went and what they learned from that process. And just a great guy. Really excited to have him on the podcast. So without further ado, let's bring David on now. So, David, thank you so much for joining us here at Salty Ginger Talk.
Thank you for having me, Joe.
Yeah. You and I connected probably about a month ago now, but I've been looking forward to this because you have, I think, several instances in your life where you can really drive home the things that we try to preach to our audience here on Salty Ginger Talk. And as you know, our podcast is entirely about getting people to live a life of meaning and purpose. And they have to decide what that is for them. I can't decide it for you because I'm not you. I don't know what does and doesn't ring your bell. But I do know that if you're anxious, if you're depressed, if you're nervous, if you feel stuck, that's probably a sign that you're not pursuing something that really means something to you and you're missing that bigger meaning or bigger purpose in your life. So we have folks like you, we find great people to come onto the podcast and give us, me and the audience, your story. How did you get from where you started to where you are, and what did you learn along the way? And then you've, in one of your experiences, you have written a book about how impactful that was for you and your family called 11 Suitcases. And we want to talk about that as well. But we usually start off with you telling us your life story. Tell us about David and how you got from where you started to where you're at, what you learned along the way, kind of high level. Then we'll go back and do deep dives on stuff that was important to you as you made your way through life.
Before I even go there, because what you just said reminded me of a quote I just read.
Yeah, do
about, like, you not being happy and trying to figure it out. And it's from Abraham Maslow. He says, there's like two or three quotes he has. What one can be, one must be. If there's a gap between what you are capable of being and what you're actually being, you will suffer. So that was a one. And then two, if you deliberately plan on being less than you're capable of being, then I warn you, you'll be unhappy for the rest of your life. And boom. I mean, right? Like that sort of sums it up a little bit, for why I suffer internally a lot and why I accomplish a lot and I'm happy and I think pretty well balanced at the same time. That quote. So, okay.
Love it.
Started second grade, the Goonies story. That's
where it starts at, where you'd be surprised how many people start in kindergarten. Like it's great.
Unfortunately, I got nothing good except that I hurt myself, got injured in kindergarten. So let's see. So I grew up in Park Slope, Brooklyn. I now live 5 blocks from where I grew up. I've always, right. So I always sort of, I grew up lived in a big city, but I've always lived near to home, except for when I went to college. That's why my moving to Barcelona in 2019 with my family for 2 years was a big deal on many levels. And I was trying to reset the clock for my kids or reset them. They'd now lived internationally for 2 years and traveled a ton more than I've done before I was 20. So I've given them a different life experience than I had. But so I live in Brooklyn. I love it here. I don't know if you're familiar with Brooklyn. It's called Brownstone, Brooklyn. So I'm in a 100-year-old house right by the park, beautiful neighborhood. So for that and many reasons is why I wanted to move back here. My wife is from Miami and we met in college. I run a company called Lawline. We're the largest provider of online continuing legal education. We're the largest provider of that. I wrote a book in 2019 about growing the first 5 years of the business from 0 to 5 million. But mostly the book is about all the mistakes I made. And there's a theme in my life, and I wrote my second book that just came out 2 weeks ago, the 11 Suitcases. When I learn information that is helpful and valuable to me, I need to share it with others. I can't stop if I wanted to. To me, the most valuable way to share that information with others is in a book, because you know how hard it is to write a book and get all that information into something that's communicative, well, easy to read, engaging. And so I have got the most return on my investments on a $15 book in my life. There's so many books I can mention that have transformed my life from $15. So that's where I keep putting it back. I have 3 kids, seniors in high school and a 7th grader and a dog, Coco. My wife and I have been married for 21 years right now. So that's, I guess, the high level. I'm sure I can go any direction you want, but that gives you the high level of where I'm at.
Yeah, no, I love that. So 21 years, congratulations. That's awesome. I love how you talk about giving your kids an experience and kind of resetting things. We'll get to that, but it'll probably come later in our conversation. Let's go back to college, where you met your wife. How did you guys meet, and how did you know that she was the right person that you wanted to spend your life with?
So it was George Washington University in DC, junior year of college. I met her at the way the old school people used to meet, in a bar, not on an app. And I don't know, like, you know how it is in college. You meet somebody, they're cute, and you hang out. And the next day, my roommate had a dog. We walked the dog together. And I think what really connected us and attracted us to each other, we have similar ways of like not putting enough. We only put as much effort in as the other person did. So neither of us was too needy or too wanting, but played hard to get. And it was that dance that I think has also been the early stages of why our marriage has been so successful, because we both just intuitively get how to handle situations. And I don't know, I think that early relationship sort of back and forth maybe is I'm just thinking about this now as I'm saying to you, but when people go, it's a good future look to what 20 years could be and how you met and how that relationship was. So we just kept, early on, I traveled abroad for semester abroad in college. She visited me. We traveled all over Europe. That was the beginning of our love for travel. And she's a year younger. So the next year she traveled abroad and I met her and we traveled around. And then she's moved to New York when she graduated. And we lived in the city. And we eventually got married. I was 26 when we got married. And what happened was we were in a small apartment and we had twins. And for like 2 or 3 years, I was like, Kelly, I promise you, Brooklyn is a good place to raise your kids. There's more room. There's a park. It doesn't feel as busy as the city. After probably a year plus of looking, we finally found our first place here, which we no longer live in. And after 6 months of being there, she said, you're right. It exceeded my expectations. So it's just a great neighborhood for raising a family.
That's awesome. And what did you both go to school for?
I went for communications, which mainly because I don't know, I like to talk, I like to listen, I like to interview, I like to ask questions. And there was no exam at the end, but I didn't know at the time there was a 50-page thesis. Ooh. And I waited till the last week to write it. I did not sleep for a week. Literally, I'm not kidding. Like, it was so bad that when I handed in the paper, you're supposed to present it, I couldn't even talk. And I told the teacher I was sick. And what turned out to be the best thing, because a week later when I went to present, I just handed him a new paper. I said, look, there were some punctuation mistakes. Of course there was, because I did it last minute. He goes, don't worry. And I showed him it was the same exact pages. It's like, don't worry. I didn't even read it yet. We switched the papers. I ended up getting an A. So not that it matters. Actually, I went to law school, so maybe it helped. But so like, that was what I did. My wife went for psychology. She became a social worker. She, for most of her career, was in social worker and liver transplant at a hospital. So we would go out to dinner with people. They're like, what do you do, Dave? I'm like, well, I'm an entrepreneur, lawyer. And she'd say, oh, I'm a social worker, liver transplant. And they'd be like, wow. It just like was the difference of like what she did. And she dealt with, making decisions on life and death for people, because a lot of people who get 50% have drinking or drug issues. And you have to assess, because you need to be on medication for the rest of your life. So you had to assess in her role if they had a stable support system to make sure they do that. Because if they don't take that medication, unfortunately, the liver is better off with somebody else. So it was an important role in the hospital.
Yeah, that's wow, that's really tough. So like literally you're trying to, based on a set of circumstances, determine if a person's upside is high enough to take the risk to actually move forward with the procedure, right?
Not even the upside is, will they take their medication every day?
Mm,
That, and if they don't, the transplant's going to fail. And it seems like a simple thing, but many people don't have the stability in their life or their family to do that. Or will they go back to drinking afterwards and abuse,
yeah,
or things like that. So that's one factor. She wasn't the deciding end all be all, but certainly an important factor of it.
sure. That just popped into my mind when you talked about people not taking their medication. So my wife and I've been married for a while, and we have three adult sons. And the middle one developed eczema when he was, I don't know, 6, 7. He wasn't very old. And so we took him to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, if you really want to get rid of this, you really need to put lotion on him 4 times a day, and then put Vaseline on him, and then use this kind of bath soap, and et cetera, and then come back in 2 weeks. And so he clearly did not know who my wife was, because like if she has an assignment that's important to her, it's getting done. And so she did everything he said, and we brought him back in 2 weeks, and he had shown some improvement. And the doctor goes, well, he looks a lot better. What'd you do? And she said, what you said. And he goes, you actually did that? She's like, yeah, you told me to. And he's like, nobody ever does what we tell them to. So it shouldn't be surprising like that. Just
Totally. Yeah.
take care of your kid. I just never
There's
occurred to me.
there's a book that I read. I can't remember the name right now, but it was about people who are actually going to die, like of heart attacks or,
Mm,
um, you know, artery disease and other things like that, life-threatening things, and they had to change their behavior, whether it's take medication or do other things to live. And the book showed how more than majority of people, like 80%, will not change their behavior, even if their life is on the line. And the book was trying to understand why. I don't even think I got through the whole thing, but I just like, it blew me away. If like you're gonna die and you can't change your behavior, there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. When you know that, like, if you don't stop eating, for example, let's say red meat, and it's gonna cause you a heart attack or more, or worse, and you keep doing it, behavior change is not easy.
No, that is true. Yeah, super interesting. And I love the quotes by Abraham Maslow, by the way. We talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs a lot on this podcast because it's something I use personally to kind of filter how I view things in life when I'm dealing with someone. I try to figure out where they are on Maslow's hierarchy of needs because it tells me about their thought process and it tells me how to communicate with them. Because if you are talking about very esoteric things as someone who's trying to make sure they got food for them and their family tonight, you're wasting your time and theirs. Like that's not their problem. And so I love Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think it's such a practical tool to use in everyday life, as strange as that may sound.
Well, not to, again, we'll get there when we get there, but just to the book, 11 Suitcases, a lot of people were giving me slack for writing it and publishing it because they're like talking about, the hierarchy of needs. A lot of people can't even think about traveling right now or let alone moving somewhere and then doing adventure travel. And it was like a very first world, rich, whatever issue. And so like, it did affect me when they wrote that, when they said that. And I was like, look, I understand that the book is not, if anything, it's about a book about family and about family growing together and making, having a vision and taking a leap. But I do understand that not everybody is on the level where, okay, where can I travel to next month? They're just living paycheck to paycheck as most people are. And it is important to know where they're at, to know who your audience is for sure.
Yeah, and I think you can have empathy. I don't have a lot of just me personally, I'm not a sympathetic person. I can be an empathetic person, but I'm not a sympathetic person because I believe very strongly in personal accountability. So, it's been my experience when you start digging on why someone is where they're at in life, there's usually pretty obvious reasons why they're there. And I get it. We all start with from different places, with different resources, with different circles of influence. And clearly, there are people that are advantaged compared to other people and people that are disadvantaged compared to other people. But at some point, it just becomes your responsibility to own your life. And I feel like we as a society give way too much slack to people in those situations. Like I find it insulting to the people that are in those situations because it's the what do they call it? The curse of low expectations or I think you know what I'm trying to say,
I
but like
gotcha.
I think so little of you that I don't think you can do more than you're doing now. It's rare that I meet someone where I'm like that, hey, you could do better. And you know you could do better. Why aren't you doing better? Like, why not? You tell me, explain it to me. Why, and I usually get a series of circumstantial excuses, not, hey, I can't do it, you know?
Well, I think it goes to the two things. One of the books that had a big influence on me was Jack Canfield, the Success Principles, and he goes to philosophy, Greek and everything else. Is there's only two things you can control: is how you think and how you feel,
Yep.
and everything else. And you can't make excuses for anything else. And so, principle number one of his book, the Success Principles, is take 100% accountability for your life. And I remember when I first read this, maybe 10 years ago, I would do these things that would inspire me. I would share with people in my company. And I was sharing this and I was reading it out loud. And I was telling people at work, you complain to your boss about your wife. At home, you complain to your wife about your boss. And you do all these things. And I remember just saying that to some of the salespeople. 10 minutes later, one of the salespersons came in completely appreciative and said, I'm taking 100% responsibility for my life. This job is not for me. I was not to be meant in sales. I'm quitting. And I couldn't have been happier for him because
Totally, yeah.
I knew it, but I wasn't, at that moment, I don't know. I was just happy for him that he understood that. And I was like, great, Dave. That was a lot of energy that was saved on my part and his part moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. That's awesome. Yeah, but let's pivot back to you because I want to make sure we get through your stuff and I want to talk a lot about your book. So why law school? What motivated you to go? Did you always know you wanted to go to law school?
My dad was a personal injury attorney, grew up, his mom immigrated from Russia when she was, I think, 9 or 11 by herself. His father died when he was 7. He grew up, had no money. He was the first one not only to go to college, but the first one to go to law school. He drove a taxi through law school,
Mm.
and it worked his ass off and sort of just built it up from there. So all he ever wanted me to do was go to law school because of what it did for him. Of course, that meant it was the last thing I wanted to do.
Right.
Right? I mean, especially being a personal injury attorney, no offense, it just wasn't for me. But here's what I'll give it to my dad. Talk about loving. My dad had vision. Most people, when you ask them what it was like to be an attorney, the first thing they'll do is complain. When you ask my dad, he would say, I'm like Robin Hood. I take from the rich insurance companies and I give it to most of my clients who are poor. And I just loved that, right? I didn't even appreciate it at the time until looking back as an entrepreneur.
Mm.
So for 5 years, I was in sales when I graduated at college. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. I thought within the first year, I'll make $1 million in some form. Wasn't close to that. And I was on my third sales job. And 9/11 happened and we were in New York City and it was a very impactful day, obviously. But more than that, where my wife lived and I, was with her a lot. She was right by one of the areas by the armory where everybody was putting up missing posters. The city was shut down. Everything was impactful. I ended up quitting my job 2 weeks later because I was just like, this is not for me. And you hear story after story of all these families, people who are missing families, and they were crying about it, and it was on the news. And it's just like something like, this is not where I want to spend my life. Part of the reason was I had met people who were like 15 years my senior, and they were on like their 12th sales job.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's not where the vision. So I didn't have a job lined up. So what did I do? I became a real estate broker, because you can do that pretty easily. And studying for the real estate exam, because you have to get that to get your license, I enjoyed the studying process. I enjoyed the learning process. There's a lot of familiarities to law with that and how it works. And that was the first time I realized, I'm like, you know what? Maybe I could be a lawyer. And then after doing that and then getting into another sales job, I realized that maybe my dream of being an entrepreneur is never going to happen. And it's better to have a career for the next 20 years, and one that could be impactful. And law was one. So for those reasons, that's when in 2003, that's how you know you've been alive a long time. You just like, you mess up by 20 years. 2003, I ended up going to law school because I was ready to be serious, I guess, and have a real career.
Yeah. No, that's a great story. I love it. And that's very inspiring about your dad. And it's something that's funny. I was talking to a guy earlier today who's traveling out of the country, and he's traveled abroad quite a bit. And he said, I try to explain to people, they don't understand how lucky they are to live in the United States until you go somewhere else and understand all of the things that are available to you. And I'm not saying it's perfect. We got tons of problems. There's all sorts of things we could do better. All of the caveats involved. With all of that said, everything else in consideration, it's not a bad place to be. And I love hearing stories about people who immigrate here. My family immigrated here. I'm my fifth generation, whatever, but mine all came over from Ireland, around the potato famine. And like, it's a place you can make it if you're willing to just keep grinding and figure something out. I love hearing stuff like about your dad. And then, for him to want that so badly for his son too, like, that's just cool. I love that stuff. I just
totally
inspiring.
Look, we're Jewish, and everybody who came here from my family, they were escaping pogroms in Russia or Eastern Europe. Yep. And so like it's sort of, that was a place, it was tough to get. They got in either in the 30s or in 1911 or whatever, before World War II, and it was much harder to get in. So it became a place. And even as my dad became a personal injury, one of the reasons was he thought he was going to work at a white shoe firm, like a big law, and be in mergers and acquisitions. They weren't hiring any Jewish attorneys at that time. So that's how that's how many Jewish attorneys ended up becoming personal injury attorneys, because that was the opportunity and ended up being very lucrative, because for all the reasons, you get all the jokes are about personal injury, but that's where it ended up. So, that's, I was just mindful of all of that, like coming into it, and you hear stories about it. And now here we are post October 7th, the things that you heard about and the things that you talk about every year about Jewish people being persecuted go back 1,000, 2,000 years. When I traveled around Europe, we went to like Morocco as an example, or anywhere we went in Europe. And there's like museums of like, it talks about all the pogroms of the Jewish people at that time and how they all left or were killed or had to convert. And I'm still trying to understand why. Like, I think we all are. That's, I guess, the downside of religion. Like, what I don't understand. Like, the other beautiful thing I got from traveling is like, people just want to be happy. Like, people are people, and most people in the world just want to be left alone and live their life.
Yep.
And the media gives you a biased opinion sometimes of, even in the United States, right, of who people are in different parties or different countries. And I always felt like if you can have a conversation with somebody and most importantly, if you can have a conversation and disagree, that's an amazing thing. And that's so hard to do these days.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
I don't know how I got there from that conversation, but
no, I love it. But I couldn't agree with you more. It struck me. I've always felt that way. So I went to college on a baseball scholarship, And so, the only thing that mattered in that environment was winning baseball games. And so I played with guys that were black, that were Asian, that were Hispanic, that were whatever. Nobody cared as long as you could help the team win. And there was always all sorts of good natured ribbing, like I'm a big white guy with freckles and red hair. You don't think that all the Latino guys gave me a bunch of shit for the way that I look? You're kidding yourself. But we had each other's backs. We were friends. It
Yeah,
was, that's how guys communicate with each other. And I think a lot of that gets kind of lost in
totally.
translation. But my point is, I was always included. Like I got invited to houses. They came to my house. Didn't have anything to do with any of the other stuff. And so I've kind of always known that. But as an adult, I was on the L in Chicago one night at about 5 o'clock. And it was busy. It was around the holidays. And there was a lot. I think it was really busy. It was people coming home from work and going to parties and all sorts of different stuff. And it just struck me. I was standing because there was not a lot of seats, and I'm not just the way I was raised. You don't sit when there's women that are standing. So I got up and gave my seat to an old woman, and she took it. And so I was looking around, and I just noticed like there was all sorts of different people on this train. Some were old, some were young, all sorts of different nationalities, ethnicities. Some looked like they were better off financially than others, et cetera, et cetera. But when you got to a stop, if people needed to get off, they got off. If they had a bunch of packages or something, somebody was helping them get off. They were holding the doors for people to get on. And I was like, this narrative we get fed about all this division in our country is bullshit. These
Yeah.
are all just people like me that just want to live and be around their families and do good work in communities. And I just feel like we allow the constant bombardment, whether it's through social media or legacy media or whatever the channels are that we consume information, to kind of brainwash us into thinking the world's really a different way than it actually is.
Look, I think people want to survive and whatever, like that's the Abraham Maslow hierarchy of needs. And you don't realize it yet, but like assimilation is the best way to survive.
Mm,
So if you're on social media and you see everybody saying, something ridiculous,
yeah,
but like that seems where that's going. Before you know it, you're saying the same thing because that's where the group is, and that's a better chance for survival. And so I don't know. I think that's part of it. And like, I always wondered like how the Holocaust could have happened. Now I know. I
yeah,
know how easily people can be swayed and humanity can be stripped out from all of us. Like I'm not fallible to that either.
totally.
And I think maybe, yeah, the survival instincts is a strong component to that.
Yeah, yeah, couldn't agree with you more. So after you get out of law school, what'd you do? Did you practice law?
I did not. So in law school, I started a public access TV show interviewing entrepreneurs. There's a longer story behind that, but I didn't give up my dream of wanting to start my own company. And so the reason I can have a public access TV show, in New York City, it was free for anybody who lives in Manhattan to have their own TV show as part of the agreement with cable networks. So I started interviewing entrepreneurs. One of the first ones I interviewed was Simon Sinek, who
Oh
now
yeah.
is super, super famous. And I met so many people through that. It was essentially the first podcast, right? And I put it on YouTube in 2006. And that became the foundation of everything I've grown to today. From what I've learned, from the network that I have, and from the business that I started. Excuse me 1 sec. Let me just. It's 4 o'clock, 4:30, late in the day. The voice.
Totally.
This is my
Zero
12th
issues.
conversation today. So I had this idea that something my dad had started 5 years earlier, but had stopped. Instead of interviewing entrepreneurs, let me interview lawyers and turn those into courses, because it was mandatory at that time for lawyers to complete these courses and then start selling them. Because if I had another life, I would have been selling entrepreneur stuff, entrepreneur education, lifelong learning, which is sort of what I still do passionately. But that's the business I thought I was getting in. But when I started selling these courses for lawyers, I was in my third year of college. I went to school 2 days a week, and I was building the company 3 days a week. And I graduated, I took the bar, and I said, okay, I'm giving myself 1 year to see if this can work. The third month in, we used credit cards to fund it. We made 10,000. It was just me and a high school intern. We made $10,000 the third month. I remember thinking, wow, it can't get better than that.
Right?
I took my wife out to the nicest restaurant in the city. And, thank God it's continued, obviously, to grow and build a great team and culture 20 years later. And I never thought I'd still be in the game, if I'm going to be honest. But I've been able to be in the game because I like to think of it like a high school project. And now that AI is here, it's a whole new game, and we have to like think completely differently. And it also it has allowed me to live the life that I've always dreamed of living, building a role that is meant for me and also for my employees. So we're intentional about the work-life balance that we built at Lawline for everybody, for sure. Like, we have a 4-day work week. We have lots of cultural things, lots of days off. We have company retreats. We're going to Disney World in a couple months. So a lot of good stuff.
Very cool. And it's funny. So, we have, excuse me, we have all sorts, like we were just talking about on the podcast, we have all sorts of different people, old, young, all sorts of different nationalities. We've had people from, I think it's 10 countries now, 10 different countries on the podcast. Different socioeconomic backgrounds, et cetera, et cetera. But we see some commonalities for people that have really built a life that they're fulfilled in and has some meaning and purpose to them. We see commonalities. And one of those commonalities you've already talked about, which is taking action. It does not come by accident. You can listen, like we want people to listen to our podcast because we think we have very compelling guests that give very useful information to help you get unstuck and move forward in your life. But it doesn't do a damn bit of good if you don't actually do it. And so, you've already talked about pivoting multiple times, right? So you get out of college and, hey, I'm going to go do this, get a sales job, and then 3 sales jobs in, you're like, yeah, not for me. I was an entrepreneur. That wasn't cutting it. I decided I'll go the law school route because I really, my dad's wisdom starting to make sense here to me. Then you get out of law school and you've developed this while you're in law school. You're still taking action. You start this interview program on public access. Most people don't remember. I'm old enough to remember public access. I remember public access. And so you never knew what you were going to find because it was just like, to your point, it was free airtime. If you're willing to show up at the studio and record something, they had to put it on public access so long as you weren't like killing animals or doing satanic rituals, or it was there,
Yeah, for sure.
But I love that action. I just call it out to the audience whenever I hear it and see it.
Well,
So
I'll tell you, so I mentioned the interviews that I did on the show, the 5 themes that I learned in those interviews from all the entrepreneurs. Theme number 1, take action. Theme number 2, don't listen to the negativity of naysayers. And most of the naysayers they were talking about weren't people who hated them. It was their parents and their loved ones who wanted to protect them. So if you were going to take advice, make sure you're taking advice from somebody who's done what you're trying to do.
Exactly.
And so anyway, so like those are some of the 2 things that really stood out to me. And so, but the book that I wrote is called The Fast Forward Mindset in 2019. It's about how to get out of your comfort zone, but more importantly, how to stay out of your comfort zone once you're out of there, because many entrepreneurs are like me and you. Actually, taking action is the easy part. It's sticking through something we take action on and seeing it to the end is the hard part. And that's where success truly happens. And that's where, I've been lucky to have a great team, to build a foundation. But if you had to choose, I'd rather somebody take action and stop 80% of things that they're doing versus thinking it through and not, barely doing anything.
What were the other 3 themes? So take action, don't listen to the negativity from the naysayers. You said 5 things. What were the other 3?
Correct. Let's see if I can remember them. Take action, don't listen to the negativity naysayers. help others without wanting anything in return. You have to network, and networking could be doing a podcast like this. Um, and the third one's a good one. The fifth one now, it's disappeared in my head. It will circle back probably while we're talking, and it'll show you.
Perfect. It's a Easter egg that we'll put out towards the end of the episode so that people can remember. Oh, that's right. That's what
Yeah,
David was talking about.
exactly.
That's number 5.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that. So you're in New York this whole time this thing is going on, and you talked about your wife and her job as a social worker, explicitly around liver transplants and the
Yeah.
seriousness of that position and situation. But um, you guys at some point made a choice that you wanted to try to live abroad with your family. Kind of talk us through how you got from, so you start the business, you put the money on the credit cards, you wind up covering the nut, and things go well enough for you. I don't want to say well, because I'm sure there were back and forth and all the other jazz that goes with it. It's never linear. I know that. Um, but you get to a point where you're like, hey, this is going pretty well for us, but we'd like to make some changes. What motivated you at that point in your life to make changes? Because my bet is if someone that didn't know you looked from the outside, okay, so this is a happily married couple, they got kids, they both got jobs they really like. Why would you want to upset that apple cart? Right?
Okay. Great question. That happened in 2019, but in order to answer that, I need to go backwards to 2015.
Do it.
And to give context, Lawline was started 2006, 2007 from law school. So that was about 10 years, almost 10 years later. So in 2015, we were struggling because we had 3 kids, 6 years and under, and we couldn't get them to bed at night. We couldn't deal with morning routine and everything in between. So, we were happy, but it's like, young kids are not easy. And so we sought out help from our friends and whoever would, who's been through that situation before. And somebody recommended this book called Three Big Questions for a Frantic Family. It's written by Patrick Lencioni, who also wrote 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. And it takes everything you've learned about core values, mission, vision, and it applies it to your family. And I love that because I thought about at the time how much time and energy I'd spent building my leadership skills and very little time being a better parent, which is interesting, like something society does not focus enough on as a whole. So
for what it's worth, I have found myself guilty of that multiple times in my life. So you are certainly not alone. I don't think a lot of people are willing to admit it. I'm certainly willing to admit it. There were times where I got it out of whack or out of balance. It was always in my mind the way I wanted it to be. But yeah, for what it's worth, you're not alone.
look,
So I apologize for cutting across.
No, we're just like, there's no, people think they're doing it wrong. We just weren't given the guide, the instructions to how to be a parent, how to live a life. And I still think there's a need in the marketplace to do that and a way to do it well. So maybe there's an idea here. I don't know. So this book was a helpful one. So I would recommend this book. Anyone who feels like they're struggling right now, 3 big questions for a frantic family. One of the questions you had to answer and put was, what is unique about your family? And with that is, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? Right. And so that was 2015. Where do we see yourself in 2025? So the twins are 6 years old. So they were old enough to participate. So we went around the kitchen table and started saying, I want to be positive. I want to be self-confident. I want to have a sense of humor. And so we did all that. We turned it to a paragraph. And I said, I want to travel because that's what Kelly and I love to do back in college. And so it said all these things. And at the end of it, it said, we want to experience life through travel. Didn't mean anything. I don't even know what it meant. It just meant I knew inside that's what was important to me. And as I've learned in all the self-help books that I've read is like The Secret and Think and Grow Rich and on, if you have something that's important to you and you want it to happen, you have to share it with the world to attract like-minded individuals who have the same purpose or goals. And it works because you start being direct in that way. And I started sharing it. And I was directed to somebody who had just come back from living abroad in Barcelona for 1 year. And so when I met him and he was telling me about it, I'm like, look, this is a pipe dream to us. I appreciate you sharing it, but I don't want to waste your time. And whatever it was. And then 4 years, we had dozen plus conversations. We went out to dinner. We did things together. Just kept seeping in. And then eventually in 2019, we hit this. You said we were happy. We were very happy. We were also in a rut. And the rut was everything was exactly the same for 3 years in a row. Wake up, get the kids to school, go to work, come home, feed the kids, watch a show, go to bed. 3 years in a row. Exactly that, right? I don't know about you. I know routine sets you free, but routine like takes the life out of me too. And I was starting to get nervous. I'm like, this can't be it. And I knew there has to be something adventurous. And because we had that vision that we wrote down about living life through travel, and we were talking to this guy who went to Barcelona, and I said, Kelly, actually, she said to me, she's like, why don't we apply to the school that David Rich's kids went to? And the reason the timing worked, the twins are going from elementary school to middle school. So they were leaving the school anyway.
Sure.
And I'll pause there for a moment, but by just inserting let's see what happens when we apply to the school and change. So we were happy, but we were in this rut. So to change, get out of this rut and see what happens. That's what led to a lot of small decisions and small steps until before we knew it, we were packing 11 suitcases in August of 2019 and getting on a plane.
Love that. And, I think, so the way you said that, I think is really smart. And I think it's worth having a little bit of conversation about. I think happy is overrated. Happy, everyone, just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. Maybe. I think what you actually want is fulfillment and meaning. Because when you're working towards something, or like you talked about, learning to get out of and stay out of your comfort zone, that's not always rainbows and unicorns. And I think people conflate, well, if I'm unhappy during part of that process, then I'm doing the wrong process. And
happiness and comfort aren't the same thing.
Yeah, right. I think they get conflated.
For me, at least. Maybe for some people, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm trying to say is they get conflated and they're not the same thing. When I think back to the times in my life where I was like really kind of performing at what I felt like, hey man, I'm like captain of the universe here. I'm really killing it and doing things that I'm really fulfilled from and getting a lot out of. I was busting my ass and I didn't have a lot of downtime and I'm not saying that's the end all be all either, but I know for me, if I feel like I'm making myself better, I can feel it when I'm in it, even in the periods when it sucks. I think that's why I got really good at baseball, is because when I was all I ever wanted to do was be a professional baseball player from the time I was 3 till the time I met my wife. And I loved every part of it. I loved lifting weights. I loved running in the summer when everybody else was at the beach. I loved fielding ground balls when nobody else was at practice. Like I loved it. And it was work, it was hard, but I loved it being hard. And I think if you find yourself in those situations willing to do the stuff that should seem hard, but you like it when it's hard, I think you're onto something.
I purposely put myself in situations that are hard, even though it doesn't make sense to everybody. And there's not always a plan on exactly what it's going to do. Writing this book, I started it in Barcelona and I finished it almost 6 years later.
Yeah.
That was freaking hard. So
and you'd already written a book, right? This is your second book.
Yeah. And that took me years to write as well. And like that I love writing books and I hate writing books because they're so hard, because you have to write it 20 times and you got to read it 60 times. And then that's the easy part. You publish the book, you got to get people to actually care about it. That's the really hard part. And that's the scary part, because you spent 5 years of your life and now you can barely get 500 people to read it, right? Or you can, if that, the average book sells 225 copies. It's mostly family and friends.
Right. Yeah. So
that was a mic drop. That was a mic drop line.
It's like the old joke, right? How do you become a millionaire? Start with $1 billion and write a book. right?
or buy a plane or get into horse breeding, whatever you want to say.
Exactly. Insert money sucking hobby
Get a
here.
boat. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, I think the way you said that was so smart. I thought it was worth spending a little time on that. But so you titled your book 11 Suitcases, and there's really significance behind the title. I'd love to hear you talk about that for a little bit before we talk about the book itself.
Yeah. So, well, I first the first title of the book was The Year We Said Yes, which actually became chapter one. And I'll get into that in a minute. So, but it had to do with what happened the first month we were there. The reason I switched the title, as I was some people were giving me feedback like, what does that mean? Like, did you get married for the year? Like, what was that year? And then there was also a book that was out. It was very popular. It's called The Year of Yes from Shonda Rhimes. And that's a hugely popular book. And it was just too similar. And I'm embarrassed to say how difficult it was to come up with the title. Like, I had 1,000 different names, whatever. And you think the right title is going to make you sell 1,000,000 copies. Of course, it doesn't mean that. But 11 Suitcases actually came from the fact the photo that we decided to use for the cover. I didn't want to compromise. I wanted this photo on the cover. And we turned into like a drawing looking thing, but this was actually taken in Delta the day we were leaving. And then what you see in here is the view from our terrace in Barcelona. And so somebody was like saying to me, I love the photo, but I wish there was less. I wish the suitcases weren't such a big part of it. I wish you guys were part of it more. And I was like, actually, the suitcases were a big part of it's not easy to pack what you want to move for a year and choose what you're going to take. And even like the day we were leaving, those weren't the suitcases we had the morning we were leaving. I had packed these huge duffel bags, these military grade duffel bags that were my kids used for sleepaway camp, that I called the airport the morning we were leaving. I was, these are too big. So I had to go shopping 4 hours before or 5 hours before our flight to buy 4 new suitcases. And so and then we had to, figure out what we were taking. We put so much stuff in the basement that we never used again. And then we just gave away when we came home. So that's why it ended up becoming 11 Suitcases, because it tells a little bit about, it gives you a little bit of okay, they must be traveling. I'm not really sure the story. And it was just to give a little bit of a hook. So somebody would be more curious than potentially The Year We Said Yes, which doesn't really explain what's happening. Obviously there's the subtitle, but nobody really listens or pays attention to subtitles anymore. So that's a little bit about why it ended up there. And I think we've got a pretty good reception from it so far, the name.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. I read, I do a lot of research ahead of having guests on so that I'm not sitting here
Thank you.
stuttering and stammering like a knucklehead. I loved how in some of the stuff I read, you talked about kind of the significance of having to confront all the material things and say, hey, what's really important? Yeah, you need some material stuff just for the modern world, but talk a little bit about that process as you made your decisions on what you were going to. Well, I guess first, did you sell your house and your stuff? What'd you do with your Brooklyn stuff when you went to Barcelona?
We got really lucky. We had a tenant who was coming in and wanted to live there temporarily while I think they were either finding their own place to buy. So we didn't have to move any of our furniture. Maybe a couple things. We didn't move any of our furniture, our silverware, our plate, they just used everything. So
wow,
that was amazing. Because that saves a lot of time. But some things we didn't take. So we just temporarily just shoved it all in the basement. But we also still took a lot of unnecessary things. We took books that we never read. I took all these suits that I never wore. I wasn't going to wear suits in Barcelona. And so we have friends who had 4 suitcases. And so maybe that's where we should get to. So there was a lot of that. And I'll tell you now, packing's never easy for us. I'm always an overpacker. It's always, and I think a lot of people can relate to that. So it's just the decisions you have to make, what's important, what's not before any trip are one thing, but now you say, okay, I'm moving there. How do I decide what to take or not? And then eventually you just got to you look at your watch. Oh, we're leaving. We gotta close the suitcase and just hope
it's time.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Did anyone in your family speak Spanish before you moved to Barcelona?
My wife had lived in Sevilla when she was abroad, so she had some Spanish. So it's a base level, but besides that, nobody spoke Spanish.
Yeah, I love that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
My wife and I went to Mexico last year, and I had zero expectation that anyone would speak English. And both my wife and I are attempting to learn Spanish right now because our youngest son is getting married, and our daughter-in-law is from Puerto Rico,
Oh,
and so
nice.
she's bilingual, and we love her to death. And her family speaks mostly Spanish when they're at home. And I'm not going to sit around while people are talking about me in another language and not know what they're saying. So I'm learning Spanish, and so is my wife.
I don't know if you're doing this, but the best way to learn Spanish is to go on a site like Baseling as example. There's a bunch of them where you can get somebody, just to talk to in Spanish who can either teach you a little bit or just talk with you, because it's one thing to learn it, but it's another thing to try to have a conversation in it.
No, that's a great tip. Funny anecdote. When we went to Mexico, we were talking. We landed in one spot and took a shuttle to another, and our shuttle driver happened to be bilingual. And so we were telling him about attempting to learn Spanish. He said, "Oh, I got the secret for you." And he reached into his console and he pulled out a bottle of tequila. And he says, "If you take 3 shots of this, you'll be speaking Spanish in no time."
There you go.
Great sense of humor. But so what were you able to set up or know? Like, what gave you a level of comfort to move your entire family to Barcelona? Did you have school set up? Did you have housing set up? Did you have jobs set up? How did you work all
Yeah.
that?
So great question again. So the person who told me about originally, and I said it felt like a pipe dream. It was almost like paint by numbers. He said, live in this neighborhood, go to this school, join these WhatsApp groups. He introduced me to some key people who became some of my best friends there.
Wow.
So they really helped make it not that we wouldn't have figured it out on our own, but it made it much simpler to do that. So we had that all figured out before we can. So it's just another advice tip, right? Like find somebody else who's done that, learn from them. You don't have to make it figure it out all on your own. Like everyone's done something that you want to do. And then, so that was that part. And then for my company, it was a bit of a risk, and we had some struggles, if I'm going to be honest. I was only the second person in my company to my CEO at the time. He was in marketing. His wife ended up going to school in Ithaca. So he had to move, and everybody else was located in New York City. We had an office, like the olden days. We were in an office, we were working together. And then, we had the vision. We wrote the vision in 2015. We had the opportunity. I said, you know what? 80% of the time you spend with your kids is before the age of 18.
Yep.
If we don't do it now, we're never. I was like, I'm not waiting until I'm 65 and retire or whatever, and my kids are to do it. Like, this is when you do it. There's no other time. So I'm like, I know, and we have a great team at Lawline. So I felt pretty confident, and we had all these, Zoom. We were like advanced. We had all the conference rooms. We had the Zoom cameras and things like that. So I figured I can make it work, and it actually was a great thing for me because it's 6 hours ahead in Barcelona.
Yep.
So I had like 2 lives there. I had my life from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. where I would like go to the gym, I'd go to the beach, I'd hang out with friends, I'd go to like a big lunch. Then after 3 p.m., it's 9 a.m. in New York. So then I can start like communicating. So I didn't have the stress of people reaching out to me from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So I didn't feel like it would be one thing if I was doing all that. I knew everybody at work was like working and I was having fun, but everybody was sleeping. So it was a best of both scenarios, I guess you can say.
No, yeah, that works out. That works out awesome. How did your kids? Were they excited? Were they nervous? How were they before you went?
They were excited and nervous for sure. Look, Jonah was 5. So when we look back at pictures, we can't, in our mind, he was much bigger than he was. But when you look back, you're like, how did we go to Bar? He was like 5. He was he was like little, we don't think we realized how little he actually was. And the twins were 10. So like they were old enough to be nervous and excited. But I think because all their friends were separating to different schools in New York, it didn't they didn't feel like they were leaving all their friends in a class and everyone was going to move on without them. So I think that was a really important part of it. And then we talked up the adventure of travel and everything else. So I know like a month or two into it, I had a conversation with my daughter. I'm like, so how has it been moving here? She goes, actually, I thought it was going to be much harder than it was, but it was much easier than I anticipated. And I actually said to her, me too. It's been so much easier than I thought. I said, what does that mean for other things you think are difficult? And she's like, well, I guess those things will be not as difficult as I think either if this was like that. And so I thought that was just a great life lesson for her really early on in the trip.
Yeah, but you got to love hearing that as a parent because think about the possibilities that opens up in her mind. And, that's where so many of us wind up with, and none of us are immune to it. I still have limiting beliefs that I've got to figure out how to get past as well. I'm not immune to it in any way, shape, or form. So I'm certainly not sitting in an ivory tower looking down at the, proletariat making my judgments. But, being able to get those limiting beliefs out of our minds and say, hey, what do I actually want and how do I go after it? To have a life lesson like that at 10 is super powerful for sure. So let's talk about the nitty gritty of the book. Like when you talk about the book, I guess what was your purpose? What were you trying to convey in writing the book? And what do you want to explain to our listeners about the book to get them excited about it and get them interested in it?
When we moved to Barcelona, I decided I was going to publicly share on blogs and social media what we every day. Every day I put a post of what we did that day. And because I was so excited, because every day was different and every day was an adventure, and mainly it was the way to easily communicate with my family and friends without having to call my mom every day. I'm like, here's what we did. Here's what we did. I'm like, check out the blog. But really quickly, it spread to people I didn't know. Friends would pass it to friends, or people in Barcelona I had met would share it with people I didn't meet in Barcelona. And so, first of all, some of the people that I knew were reaching out to me and saying, thank you for sharing your story. It's inspiring us to do something with ours and to put it out there. So that was like, oh, awesome. Then this guy reached out to me. His name is Joe Jacoby. He won the 1992 Olympics for kayaking in Barcelona. And
Wow.
he ended up living there and becoming a coach there. And someone shared with him my blog, and he asked me if I can go out to lunch with him. It's like, of course, yeah, let's do it. And he goes, I've been reading your blog, and I want to tell you a story about how important is what you're doing by writing it. He goes, when you're younger, life, and I guess he was a kayaker, so he gave an analogy about a kayak. It's like you're on a kayak on a big river. You can turn, you can go in any direction. Everything is easy to navigate. As you get older and older, eventually into your midlife, you feel like you're in a cargo ship on a narrow river. Now you can't turn directions and you feel like you're stuck on that course moving forward. It's like, but not you. You turned your directions and you made this leap and moved to Barcelona. And it's like, and most people don't do that. And he's like, you need to keep writing and sharing this story to inspire others that they can do the same, whether it's moving to Barcelona or changing careers or whatever. And so that really impacted me. Took about a month of like keeping writing and thinking about it. Then finally, one day I shared with one of my friends, I'm like, I'm going to turn these blog posts and stories into a book someday so it can be memorialized and really be shared with others. And especially when we came back from Barcelona, so many people were like, oh, we want to do this. We want to do this. How do we do it? So, of course, life is not easy. And so while I wanted to get it done the year we moved back, it took 5 years to actually put it down, put it out there. And actually it's perfect timing, to be honest, because as I said in the beginning, my twins are now seniors in high school. They're going to college next year. So I think it's a good life transition where we're reflecting on this, what we did when they were 10 and how it transformed them to the next stage. And now they're hitting that 18-year-old stage where now I'm only going to spend 20% of their time with me for the rest of their life. So
Yeah.
that's why we wrote it. And that's why the impact I think will have for anyone in any stage in their life who reads it.
I love that. What was the thing that surprised you the most about your experience in Barcelona?
Two different things. One I already said. I really thought it was going to be much harder than it
Hmm.
was. Um, I think I underestimated how strong the expat community was, for better or worse. So I had so many international friends, American friends, and I was mostly speaking English, right? So I think, but it gave me empathy to those. You mentioned the word empathy before, right? To those who are in the U.S. in my neighborhood who are expats and living here and don't know this language, or they're learning that. Like, there's struggles. It's not easy, and people are different levels of the hierarchy of needs. But it gave me that empathy. So I think just adjusting quicker than I thought I could. Um, the physical location wise, I never thought about that Barcelona is only 2 hours from the Pyrenees. I always knew it was a beautiful weather and climate on the beach, but in 2 hours in the winter, you can drive to the Pyrenees and be skiing.
Hmm.
So, and it was good skiing too. So it just was a huge bonus because we're big skiers in my family, at least me and the boys. So there would be days where I'd be skiing with my sons, and my wife would be in Barcelona on the beach with my daughter. And I'm like, does it get like, I know that's on the West Coast, maybe a lot more. And it just like felt like I just kept doing this throughout the trip. I'm like, it, I just, it was amazing. Like, the culture is beautiful. The food was amazing. The places we visited were gorgeous. The people were great. I felt like it was adult summer camp because all these expats were there to meet other people. So you think in your 40s, you're going to have all the friends you're going to have for the rest of your life. It's hard to make new friends. Within the first 3 months, we made 30 new couple friends and good friends. And many of them we're still close with today because everybody's there to meet new people. So I think that also surprised me, how quickly it was to adapt and meet new
Yeah,
people.
that's very cool. And I did not realize so that Barcelona, I'm not familiar with the geography in Spain, so that must put it up on the coast up by the French
Correct.
Spain border, right?
Correct. There's this country that I didn't know existed before I lived in Barcelona. Maybe you don't know until right now, called Andorra.
I
Have you
do.
heard?
I actually
Okay.
do. Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't know about it, and most people don't. It's a landlocked little thing, like smaller than Rhode Island in the Pyrenees. That is an amazing ski destination too. So we would also go there to ski. So it's right in between France and Spain.
That's very cool. Yeah, I did not
Yeah.
know that. So knowing what you know now, if you were back and getting ready to go to Barcelona, what would you do different than the what you did when you took your adventure?
It's hard to say that because maybe I need more specific. Let's talk more because I don't have a quick answer to that because I felt like the trip. I don't know if I would have done much different. I mean, one thing, not that I could predict the future. Certainly, one thing that happened while we were there is COVID. So
Sure.
seven months in, we got stuck in the strictest lockdown in Europe. The kids were not legally allowed to leave the apartment for 52 days.
Wow.
So it was tough. It was, and I hate when people say this, but I write about it in the book. But I do because we all experienced our own story of, everyone has their own COVID story. In
Sure.
in Barcelona and Spain and Europe, there was a couple of things that helped really get us through it. One was the clapping every day on the terrace and the balcony. I don't know if you heard about that. I don't know if they did that really that much in the US, but all of Spain would get out every 8 o'clock and everybody's clapping and screaming every night for 100 nights. And it was the only sense of community that we can have when you're just stuck in your house. So it was great for the kids and for us. And I would say our kids now know, we figured out like ways that make them have fun. They now know more 1980s movies than most people. And they love the 1980s movies. So that was really helpful to do that.
Hey, that was a golden age of cinema making. I think
Right. I mean,
the 80s movies are awesome when you just think about the various movies and some of the franchises
yeah.
that came out in the 80s. It's tough. It's tough to argue against the 80s as one of the best decades ever in cinema. Um, for sure. So what made you guys, did you go for 2 years on purpose, or what made you decide to come back to the States?
We were going for a year when we went there. And when COVID hit, everything changed.
Hmm.
So not only did it stop so it's ironic because we went there to travel and then we got stuck in this lockdown.
Right.
So to talk about being flexible and trying to figure out a whole new level of understanding who we were. And so I think there was two things that happened that ended up forcing our hand in a good way to decide to stay. Number one, we learned that in New York, school the next year would be fully on Zoom, so not in person. But in Barcelona, we knew we were told it would be in person. And for us, that was enough to make the decision to stay because we could not go back to that. And so that was really a big component of it. And we hadn't finished what we set out to do. We set out to, we luckily we traveled like madmen the first 7 months, and we were like 20 cities, 7 countries, so we did enough to fulfill the year, but we just felt incomplete. So, but it was really for Zoom and school, and Brooklyn was really not in a good place in the summer of 2020. And in Spain, we were traveling and doing things. It was a once in a lifetime opportunity because we were traveling through places like Costa Brava and in France and in Bilbao and San Sebastian, where normally it would be swarmed with tourists. Not one. It was all locals and us. Mm-hmm. Never again are you're gonna have an experience like that.
Totally, yes.
So
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I love that. So what was the adjustment like when you got back to the States from your time in Spain?
One of the things we learned when we moved to Spain is something called a W curve. And if you think about a W, it starts on the top. So when you first move to a different culture, it's high energy, really great. You're learning new things. You love it. Then maybe a month or two in, it goes to the bottom. You're just like, you're a little bit confused. It's more challenging than you thought. All the new people you met have kind of done their own things. And so it's a little bit more challenging with the culture. Then it goes back to the top because you finally figure out and you're there. Then you move back home and you go back to the bottom because adjusting back to your old life was not easy for us in the beginning. It was just, if I could be blunt, you flying to JFK from Europe is not a pleasant thing. Like you're driving through Brooklyn and it's just, you're used to seeing these 500-year-old beautiful buildings and architecture, and it's just not the same. And then you get to Brooklyn and it was just like not pretty. And we knew this, and we were almost going to stay another year, but my son was pushing to come back. And then, it was just hard to sort of reacquaint with friends in the beginning because everybody was still in the COVID mentality in New York when like people were stuck in their pods. And so it just took a month or two for us to like get over the fact that we were no longer living the dream. But then we have a beautiful neighborhood, a strong community of friends. Everybody gracefully took us back in. For us, they had been frozen for a year and a half. So it wasn't like most of the time we were gone, they were just not doing anything new. So which is another crazy thing. We stopped when COVID happened. After the lockdown, I stopped publicly posting about our lives because we were traveling. We were living a great life after the lockdown when it was terrible here. And I didn't think it would be right. That's where I was like the Abraham hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Everyone's just trying to survive. And I'm showing them then we're in Capri right now. There's no one at the hotel except us. So it didn't feel right. So then, but once we adjusted, everything's great. And we've been here, it's been 5+ years and we're happy as can be.
Yeah. I love that. Writing this book, what did you learn from writing this book?
Well, it certainly doesn't get easier the second time. So I'm not kidding when I say I rewrote the book maybe 12 times.
Mm-hmm.
And And I stopped for a couple of years and I restarted. And the first 6 times I would write it and I would show it to my wife, a couple of the versions. She's like, it's interesting and it's good, but it's really more like a travelogue because I included 100% of the things that we did. That I only wrote about. I didn't write about the second year. I only wrote about the first year intentionally, and but it was still like too much. So I actually had to cut out 70% of what we did that first year to make it to create themes and make it digestible and make it of meaning for others. So that part was really challenging for me. And we talked about doing things that are hard. The reason I'd stopped, I gave up on the book, honestly, for a year and a half.
Mm.
And then my mom died suddenly in May of 2024. And she was really instrumental in helping me finish the first book. She had cancer twice. She was doing great, but then things went wrong. And it was actually a miracle that she was able to visit us when we were in Barcelona. Like her health was great. The timing worked out. It was before COVID. And there was just something I knew the pain and suffering of writing the book would make me feel closer to her because it's when you're tired and exhausted and hungry and whatever, you just are mentally spent. And I know there's just, it was right. When you're mentally, I just was able to feel. That's what I'm, by the way, I'm just figuring this out as I'm saying it now.
I love it.
Because as guys, it's hard for me. It's hard for me to feel a lot. I don't feel as much as I want to.
I'm with you.
And that was the only way I could feel. I guess this is the only way I could feel the pain of losing her was making myself suffer in a good, like not hurting myself, but doing something that would be make her proud.
Yeah, I get that.
So that's what pushed me to restart it. And it still took me a year and a half to get it because it's just like you start, you stop, you think you have it, you share it with an editor who's like reviewing it for you, and they're just like, this sucks. Not in so many words. So yeah, but and so far, like, we became a bestseller pretty quickly on Amazon. I've got the reviews are phenomenal. So I think it was all worth it. I think I cut down in the last few months, I cut down 15,000 words to make it really tight and it's fast reading. I wrote it as a memoir in first person present tense. So you feel like you're with us and moving along the journey versus looking back at it afterwards. So as we discover things and go through the challenges you're going through with us, I talked about maybe to my son's chagrin, parenting challenges we were having. He's like, I didn't say that. I'm like, you did, but like I'm like, you were 10 years old and it was in the middle of COVID. Like, so where it ended up, I'm so proud of. And that's the thing. The reason I took so long, I couldn't put something out in the world that I wasn't proud of. And didn't feel like it, because to me, this is about our legacy too. This is, and so is my first book. My first book is about like all the growth of my business, but to your point, a lot of the mistakes that we made.
Yep.
But it was also self-improvement. This book is about family growth and parenting, but also self-improvement. And both are my story, and both are like, God forbid something would have happened to me. Here are children, grandchildren, future generations. Here's something that David Schnurman put out in the world and shows who he was and what he did versus social media and everything else.
Well, well said. I really appreciate and respect you talking about men and expressing emotions, because I think that's a terribly important subject, and I couldn't agree with you more. We as men, it's just frowned upon in society to express yourself or be kind of a deep feeling man. It's kind of I'm 54, and the phrase walk it off was a very common phrase.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, and it didn't matter what it was. It was walk it off. You got to toughen up. World's a tough place. You just got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And not always by the way, I'm not endorsing that. Not always the best way to handle things, but it's just a statement of fact. That's how things used to be. back in the day. So I really appreciate and respect that. And then I love that the through line in both the books is about you sharing your growth, both personally and professionally, depending on, the subject in the book, and trying to improve and get things to a spot that, kept making you better and making you grow. And I think that's such a valuable lesson for
Yeah.
people to see. So I love that you did both of those.
And just to give more context, the fast forward mindset is a framework that I was writing for myself for the rest of my life to get out of my comfort zone more and be more fearless and focused in my life. And so when the other component of us moving to Barcelona was, it was right after I published my first book. And so it was us eating our own dog food of like, I just wrote a book on how to get out of your comfort zone and do things that you want to do. Let's show people that it's not bullshit. And so I used the framework in the book and the lessons, and, we had worksheets and I filled out the worksheets for us to travel abroad and to do it. And it works, right? For us, like it worked for us. And so because I knew the statistic that the average book sells 226 copies, I had to write the book for me first. And if it works for me, hopefully it'll work for others. They say you write the book you're meant to read.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, it's the same motivation for me, like on my podcast. Like I've experienced a lot of stuff in life. I'm a pretty well-traveled 54, and I feel like I have an obligation to try to share some of the things I've learned so that it can help other people do the same thing. And again, it's not my place to say you should, whatever, move with your family to Barcelona for a year or whatever, insert topic. It's not my place to tell you what it is. I just know you got to go after it. And I love those two Maslow quotes. They were so on point that you shared at the beginning of the podcast. So speaking of getting out and staying out of your comfort zone, and I don't know if these are out of your comfort zone or not, but you, in addition to writing your books and running your business, you got a couple other things going on as well. I know you do a podcast. Talk a little bit about your podcast. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the company I run is Lawline. As I mentioned, we do online lifelong learning for attorneys, but it's through formal courses. The podcast that I run is called Lawyers Who Learn. And let's just say 1% of your learning as a lawyer is through a formal course. 99% of your learning is through doing, right? Taking action and figuring it out and all the things that you go through in your life. So the podcast is about uncovering that 99%. And so I'm doing what you do, but for lawyers and in going through their growth journey. And first of all, every person has a story. It's even more so, every lawyer has a story and a journey. Because if you're going to decide to spend $200K on another form of education, and half of them don't even practice it anymore, including me, there's a story of growth and learning there in some form. So I truly love uncovering those stories like you do, clearly, and you're great at it, just to give you props.
Appreciate it.
And that is, when you think about your zone of genius, that is my zone of genius. I enjoy asking questions. I enjoy talking too, actually, because I get a lot out of it, but I really enjoy asking questions exactly like you do that are not on a linear path. That kind of take you to different places. And I'll tell you, maybe you should think about doing this. So I just started just over a year ago. I read over 100 published episodes. We just took all those episodes and we're now publishing it in a book. But we're turning the book into stories, because we had an AI take the transcript, and then we worked on a lot of prompts, and we from those prompts, because you can imagine from this hour and a half so far, you can turn this into like a good 500 to 600, 750 word story.
For sure.
Really easily. More people will read 600 words and listen to an hour and a half podcast. And so for me, it's just another form of distributing content in a way to get other people to read it. And with AI, it's so easy to do that now. And then it's just, again, another authority of having a book in the legal space. I have getting out of my comfort zone. I do want to public speak more in legal and in entrepreneurship. It's just hard to figure that world out, especially when you have I'm busy in my world. So it has not been uncomfortable or out of my comfort zone. The part that's challenging is doing so many, and we've built a process around it. So I don't know how it is for you, but I really only have to do the interview at this stage, and everyone else, I have a team that does everything else. In the first 30, 40 episodes, I did a lot more than that. But now I do what I get the most energy out of. And it's not the admin stuff behind organizing the Trello boards of making sure it gets to air.
Yeah, I do. For what it's worth, I do none of that, and I give James, our producer, all the props. But no one
Okay.
would have ever seen a single episode of Salty Ginger Talk if it wasn't for James, because it would not have been me doing all the editing and the all the other things that go on behind the scenes. And then we've got it's just three of us. There's another guy that works with us that does kind of all the SEO and the marketing, and he runs the ads and those kinds of things. So
Nice.
they do all that. The part I do, which is the part I loved it. So, I mean, for what it's worth, I also run a business. I'm the CEO of a company that owns grocery stores in Chicago. And so I run that business. I do the podcast because I love doing the podcast. And it's, we just were, I think we just passed 21,000 subscribers, which is wild to me in a year and a half.
Congrats. That's
So,
amazing.
yeah, thanks. We all really appreciate that. So I guess we should probably figure out a way to monetize it, but that's not, I just don't care. It's not why I do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So the long-winded
Then it
way,
becomes less fun, right? Because then you're
yeah,
like, yeah,
exactly. But it's my long-winded way of saying I do all the research on the guests so I do it for two reasons. One, I'm fortunate. I'm one of those weirdos that I can read something once and it sticks in my head.
totally.
Right, wrong, or indifferent. I've always had that kind of innate ability. And then two, I love the interaction because I learn so much from my
Totally.
conversations. And like you talked about networking, this is just a really easy and free way for me to network with awesome people all
Totally.
around the world. So like if I go to England, I have 5 or 6 people I could call up and go to dinner with or say,
Yeah.
hey, you got time this weekend to get together, and they would all come running because we just really connected in our conversation. Same with Australia, same thing with Canada, same thing with Denmark. Like it's crazy to me how this whole thing has played out.
So yeah, total 100%. And I think um I love so in the beginning, I did all my own research, and I would like take a video or interview they did, put it on ChatGPT, get the transcript, get some summaries, or I'd watch it. And I love that because one of the things I tried to do was not ask the same 10 questions that everyone else asked
Yeah.
because it's just boring for me. It's the same thing it's exactly the same reason I moved to Barcelona. I don't like doing the same thing everyone else does. So that was one, but we did something that was able to change it for me, and I felt good about it. The compromise was we started asking these 5 questions ahead of time that we sent to people, and not the typical questions. It was like, tell your story in a way like you were telling a story, that was interesting about your journey, not a resume. And so you hear these things, or just like, what is something interesting you're working on right now that is exciting and like challenging? What is a life just whatever. So, and I try to get to them to do it in their own words. And between that, and then my producer does like a 2-page thing, that's enough for me.
Yep.
I still do enjoy looking ahead of time first. I just ran out of bandwidth.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. And I slowed it down. There was a point where I was doing like an interview a day. Reason being, the goal was for me to meet as many amazing people as I could. So I wanted to do as many interviews, but the interviews, what I realized, and I don't know, I guess I booked this time. So as a benefit and negative, the interviews took out more from you than I realized.
Mm-hmm.
So I put from asking questions. It's easier to answer. When you ask, you have to listen intently, think about the direction, and then ask another compelling question that's not just, what's the next thing on my list, right?
Where are you from?
Yeah. So, or just not even not even responding to what they said and just go to the next question. Right. And so if I did it in the morning, I'd be more spent than I realized to do work. So I started doing them in the afternoon, which is good because then I'll be freaking from my full day and I'm spent. Yeah. And I'll probably still go to the gym tonight because that gives me more energy, but I'd rather be spent at 6:00 than at like 12. And so that's why I just stopped having time to do because I was doing like an hour and a half of research. I'm like, I'm not getting paid for this. It's not, they're not, so.
Yeah, and I do all that stuff kind of nights and weekends because not for nothing, but they're paying me to do the other thing, and I need to be a good steward of the company. And like I take that responsibility very seriously. There's
Totally.
150 people that work for the company that are counting on me not to screw it up too. So you can't just shirk your responsibilities because you like to do something. And
For
I
sure.
love doing this. So yeah, I noticed the speaking. It's something I'm actually in the process of kind of putting together a CV to start. But and I've been speaking publicly for like since I was a kid. It's just never. It's a format I'm very comfortable in, and I'm a pretty good storyteller, and so I connect with audiences really well. But again, you can only do so many things, right? Everything has an opportunity cost associated to it. And
I think the thing that I tell myself to stop myself before I even give it a shot, which is, I'm not saying a good thing, is if you become a successful public speaker, you're going to have to travel a lot and be away from your family. And that goes against a core goal. Like, I don't mind traveling for different things, but like, I don't want to travel a lot. Again, it's a limiting belief, because let me have that problem and then make a decision versus not even get myself there. And I love speaking too. I've done stand up, I've done keynotes, in front of 1,000 people. I've done small things. I've never been paid for any of it. I've always done it volunteer, and it's been great. I think it's not like I'm learning now, and I'm speaking to somebody, to become a successful speaker and to get booked, you actually need intention. You need an agent. You need to know who your target audience is. You need to have a topic that's there. You need to spend a lot of time and energy on getting there, or you have to be famous from something else where you're sought out.
right,
And so when you're like me and you, we're full-time entrepreneurs who are not famous and family men and hobbies and other things, there's enough excuses in my world to prevent this thing that's out of my comfort zone. Speaking is not out of my comfort zone. Figuring out how to get booked properly and go through that process.
right.
I'm gonna, if we talk in 12 months from now, I hope to have a different story to tell. So we'll see. But I've been saying that for years, so we'll see.
Totally. No, it's you. I think you just hit the nail on the head in terms of the only thing that's holding me back. I don't mind the travel as much because we have three sons and they're all out in the real world. Our youngest
Yeah.
is 26, and so we don't have to factor those things in. And my wife she doesn't have a job outside the home. She runs our family. When I say our family, I don't just mean me and our three boys. Like we've kind of become now the penultimate family unit or couple in both sides of our family. So kind of everything runs through her, and she can do that from wherever we're at. So she could go with me if I do travel, which is good because the August will be our 33rd anniversary, and we're that crazy couple that really enjoys spending time with each other. We don't like to be apart. And I'm not judging anybody.
No, totally.
I just know how our relationship works. We like each other and we like being around
For sure.
each other. So that would be important to me if I do go down that road. But yeah, we'll see. We'll see. So one of the things, David, I do.
She can be your booking agent.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we cover a lot of territory. I ask a lot of questions. We flesh out a lot of stuff on the podcast. However, I'm certainly not the brightest guy in the world, not the dumbest either, but not the brightest by any stretch of the imagination. And I don't want to miss an opportunity because I didn't ask good questions or bring up good topics. So
Yeah.
I always ask our guests towards the end of our conversation, is there anything that I haven't asked you about yet that you feel strongly about that you want to talk about while we're in front of the audience? And it's okay if there's nothing, but I usually can uncover some pretty good nuggets just by opening the floor and saying, tell me what you want to talk about.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I started the podcast was to uncover these stories. But the other reason was I realized, as I said to you earlier on, so much of my success in life came from my first show on public access, which was essentially a podcast before there's podcasts. So I knew by starting this again, it has already led to and is going to lead to really big things for me. just because of the momentum and the stage that I'm at in my life and the success of everything. I'm just at a bigger stage in life and bigger network than I was before.
Right.
But also, what I didn't expect is how I would learn some stuff from the interviews. And one component that maybe you can relate to or other people was I've always lived my life saying I have undiagnosed ADHD. And but also not really believing ADHD was real, even though my daughter actually has it and pretty, strong form of it, and takes medication, and it's been really helpful for her. But even with that, I'm like, okay, but that's different. I just, in my mindset, everybody has it in some form. It's just, it is what it is. So like, I'll just get through it. And I had done this entrepreneurial project. I did this project for this group I was part of. They're like, what is the cover of your book? That exercise. It was a little different. It was like to represent sort of how you're feeling right now. And the cover of my book at that time was just below the surface. And when I wrote that, what I thought I meant was that I was so close to getting to my fulfillment, the hierarchy of needs of getting to where I wanted, and I'm just right there. And then I started interviewing some people on my podcast who were either coaches for lawyers with ADHD or lawyers who had it, and they were kind of taking me through it. And I was like, oh yeah, but it's not real, right? I have it too, sure. And they started like educating me, like no, it's real. And like they started telling me a little bit about the science behind it, which was helpful. And it's a lack of dopamine, and you're chasing dopamine. That's why you procrastinate and wait to the last minute. And that's why you're really good in emergency situations or really good at interviews, because your dopamine has to be high because you have to listen intently, or anything that takes stress you're good at. But you want me to go through a checklist or do admin, you just like can't handle it. And so many things in my life, I felt like something's wrong with me because I'm so good. I built this company. I've done this. I'm so good at so many things, but there's a side of me that's just not. But it was like, my internal conversation in my head was like, you suck. Right. And it's still sometimes you suck. What's wrong with you? And then when I actually got tested for ADHD and I started going through it, because I knew I had it, but I just wanted to see it. And my whole family was like, of course you have it. Like, duh. And I started to see, what it said in there and the patterns. And I started to realize these things that I was bad at, was talking bad about myself to, were not weaknesses. They were actual symptoms of chasing dopamine or neurodeficiencies, dare I say. I don't even want to say it like that, but like I have this like hiccup, like, I don't know. So, but like just, they were not my fault, is I guess what you want to say. Sure. It's just how my brain is made up, which is what it did for me. It gave me a whole lot of empathy for myself. It gave me grace for myself. And overnight, I became much happier. And then finally, to put this whole thing in a circle, the book title that I wrote, Just Under the Surface, when I really thought about what it meant, it didn't mean I was under the surface about to hit my thing. It meant that many times I'm stuck in a fog and I feel like I'm under the surface of a water and I'm drowning. And so one last thing, and then I'll let you do with it what you want, is the flip side of this is many people ask me, Dave, how do you do so much? Why do you have a book and you have a podcast and you moved to Barcelona and you have a company, blah, blah, blah. And I realized I'm chasing dopamine.
Yep.
And I say, look, I do all this because I need to. If I didn't move to Barcelona, now I'm actually realizing this right now. My dopamine was so low during those years in 2019 where I was in the routine. I was looking for something to get me there, and that was it. And so I'm still I realize I chase dopamine, which leads to taking a lot of action where most people wouldn't, because it is stressful to do. So I think that was pretty big that we didn't get to.
No, that's huge. And look, I've never heard that explanation about ADHD, and it makes perfect sense when you stop and think about it, because we've done a couple of episodes on learning how to regulate your dopamine, because that's why like Facebook becomes addictive, is that little like or the little whatever becomes, oh, look at this, look at that. And it's funny because that doesn't do it for me. And that, again, not a statement of fact. That's not a judgment in any way, shape, or form.
Me
But
neither.
people liking or not liking my stuff, I learned long ago that I don't care a lot what other people think about me. That can be good sometimes. It can be bad sometimes because it can create blind spots in your life. And that's, I kind of warn people because people say, oh, it must be really nice. I'm like, not always,
Yeah.
because like if someone has some critical thing to say about you, they could be right. Like, and if you don't care, it doesn't create the appropriate amount of introspection to at least filter it and go, hey, is there something there? Or is
Yeah.
this just someone being a jerk to me? And if they're just being a jerk, fine, let it go. But it's easy to write things off when you have that
It,
when you have that thought process about it.
it's none of your business what anyone else thinks of you.
That's right. It's
Uh,
exactly right. It's
but
exactly
but
right.
but look, that's also like, the more famous you get, like if you're gonna be put yourself out there, you're gonna get hate. Like it's just a guarantee. And you need to figure out how to deal with that because if you don't, it's gonna be a world of pain. And I'm not saying I figured it out myself either, but what I do know is there's what I did learn, there's like 9 different types or more of types of ADHD or whatever. I don't have impulsivity or whatever. And so like a lot of people who with ADHD actually, to your point, social media binge or drink or other things to give them that dopamine high, but it's actually not so uncommon. And the other thing I would say is I had times when I tell my wife I felt depressed, and she's like, "What do you mean you're depressed? Like you're not depressed." I'm like, "I know I'm not. I just feel depressed right now." And when I started doing some research and seeing some videos about it, it became so freaking clear why I felt that way. And this was helpful to understand it. I was depressed because I was overwhelmed by all the priorities in my head and not being able to sort it out. So I was depressed, and I still got it, like depressed by the overwhelm. And so like, I don't know, just recognizing that's what it was has been just in months. It's only been has been transformative for me to get to snap out of it that much quicker or to give myself forgiveness or grace, like this is what's happening. There's nothing wrong with me because of this. So I just want to let anyone else who's gotten this far or seen this, it is worth sort of diving into this more or just learning more about those areas. There's plenty of videos that dive talk about this much better than I could.
I love that. I really appreciate you sharing it. Again, I've never heard that link to dopamine, and it makes tons
Yeah.
of sense now that I've heard you say it out loud. To me, the big takeaway, aside from the science you just talked about, is it's important to know who you are. Like, if you know who you are, you've got a good chance at setting up your life in a way that gives you the best chance of really going after something that means something to you. And if you don't, it makes it hard. Like, it makes it hard to cut through the fog, like you talked about. And if you can cut through the fog, that's half the battle because then at least you're
Well,
off and running.
because I get slack from people like who are relatives or at my company or whatever who've known me for a long time. They're like, here goes another one of David's ideas or things or whatever. And I'm like, I'm just chasing my dopamine. Don't be a hater. Um, and I have a lot of results to prove. Like I also realized a long time ago, like I don't want to be a shelf help addict. I want to be a self help addict, like a shelf help. You read a book and then just put it back on the shelf.
Right.
But you don't do anything with it. If I'm, there's things I don't complete a lot, but another thing from the book that I mentioned earlier on from Jack Canfield, the success principles, and I put this in my book, The Fast Forward Mindset, was principle number 54, keep your commitments. So unless hell or high water, when I make a commitment to do something, I keep it. And once you'd be surprised, maybe not because you've been around as well, how many people cancel on you for things last minute because they're tired or they're exhausted and they give you a whole big excuse or whatever. And that to me is not only are you putting a bad taste in other person's mouth, you're putting a bad taste in your mouth because you're bullshitting. And
Mhm.
so when you keep your commitments, people trust you more and respect you more, and you respect yourself more. And so that's the first. When I learned that, I was like, "What's the hardest thing I can think of doing?" This was in 2012. The most I'd run at that time was a 5K. So I was like, I'm going to run a marathon. And 3 months later, with a friend of mine, I ran my first marathon.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, and look, you're right. It's that either that self belief or self doubt from keeping the commitments to yourself. I heard it from Kobe Bryant. I know it's been said before, but don't negotiate with yourself. Like once you commit something to yourself, prove to yourself that you can believe in yourself, and it's the sky's the limit if you can
Yeah.
develop that mindset. It's super helpful. So, well, David, thank you so much for
Yeah.
appearing on
Wow.
Salty Ginger Talk, man. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Joe. That was a lot of fun. And you always know a good conversation when you learn about yourself. And I feel like I did learn about myself on this. So it was helpful. So thank you for the free therapy.
No, yeah, I appreciate you coming on. So for the listeners, real quick, we'll get from David links to both of his books, put them in the show notes. We're going to link his website there in case you're interested about his company or seeing his podcast. I don't know how many of you out there are attorneys, but if you are, great resource there for you. And look, for right, wrong, or indifferent, I've dealt with literally hundreds of attorneys in my life through my business dealings and other things, and couldn't agree with you more that what you learn in law school is just the cost of entry. Like it doesn't mean anything about practicing law. It's just what you need to do to be able to do it. And almost everything else comes after the fact. So to have the continuing education, to have the stories of other lawyers and other scenarios, super beneficial. And just last thing, David, we'll definitely have you back on in some way, shape, or form because I really enjoyed our conversation, and I know there's a lot more we could talk
Well,
about that we didn't talk about in this
why
episode.
don't me and you, I don't know, we'll come up with the right time frame. We'll both come back on and talk about all the speaking that we have done and learned from and see where we end up with that.
There you go. That's perfect. We'll figure out the right timing and
Yeah.
hold each other accountable.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Joe. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. Have a great night.
Later, you too.
Okay. Okay, guys, there you go. So David did not disappoint at all. Loved our conversation with him, kind of wide ranging as they usually are here on Salty Ginger Talk. Loved hearing about his meeting his wife and them traveling abroad and then putting a life together, and his kind of path from, hey, I graduated college and went out in the world and then decided to go to law school, largely inspired by his father who immigrated from Russia, and just good stuff all the way around. So we will have links to both his books in the show notes. We'll have his website to his company in the show notes. The podcast that he runs is also available on his website, so you can get to it from there as well. And as you heard at the end there, we'll have David back on. Both he and I committed to doing some public speaking because we've both been kind of hemming and hawing about it, and we both committed on the show there to do it. So we'll get him back on to talk about that somewhere down the road. So David, great job. Really appreciate you coming onto the channel, and we're looking forward to having you back in the future. So James puts it up over here every day. Head over to our website, saltygingertalk.com. All our podcast episodes are available there. Links to our social media accounts are available there. We publish a newsletter every weekday you can subscribe to there. We have great guests on the podcast that teach you all sorts of lessons you can learn to make your life the way you want it to be. We do a live stream every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. We publish episodes that help you with lessons and real world practical tips to incorporate right now into your life to start making it the way you want it to be. It's all great stuff. You don't want to miss any of it because it's really going to help you. So make sure you catch our next episode. We'll see you there.